Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. My name is Emily, I'm 32 years old, and exactly 15 days ago I gave birth to the baby I had dreamed about my entire life. The same child my husband Jason and I planned for during late-night talks filled with hopes and promises. I remember the moment I heard that first cry. My body trembled, my heart burst into tears, and suddenly everything made sense. I held him like I was holding a piece of heaven, certain that nothing in the world could ever take that joy away from me. But I was wrong. I just didn't know yet that the love I had waited so long for would come wrapped in pain, lies, and a betrayal that would rip me apart from the inside. We had talked about having a baby for years, mapping out every detail like it was a dream we could touch: names, bedtime routines, the color of the nursery. Jason and I wanted to be parents more than anything else. It was the one goal we both held on to when everything else felt uncertain. Every appointment, every ultrasound, every little kick was a celebration in our house. We decorated the baby's room together, folding tiny clothes, imagining what he'd look like, who he'd become. I believed that child would only bring us closer, that he would complete the love we had built. My pregnancy wasn't easy. By the third trimester, I had gained 55 pounds, my back ached constantly, and my ankles were always swollen. But nothing scared me more than the blood pressure spike during labor. When doctors started whispering in urgent tones, they said it was dangerous, that both our lives were on the line, and for a moment I thought I'd never get to meet my son. But after hours of pain and panic, he arrived, tiny, perfect, crying. I was exhausted, soaked in sweat and fear, but he was alive and so was I. The moment they placed him in my arms, everything else disappeared. The IVs, the hospital lights, the lingering pain. I stared at him, overwhelmed by a love so powerful it made my chest ache. I had waited so long for this moment that it felt like time had stopped just for us. I thought Jason would be feeling the same, that we'd look at each other with tears and gratitude. But when I glanced at him, he wasn't even looking at the baby, he was checking his phone. At first I tried to justify it. Maybe it was work, maybe he was just nervous, maybe new fatherhood hadn't hit him yet. But the truth had started before that moment. During the last month of my pregnancy, Jason had already begun to slip away from me. He came home late, barely touched me, and smiled only when I didn't ask questions. There was something cold in his eyes, something that didn't belong in the man I married. I told myself he was just tired, but my heart already knew better. Whenever I gathered the courage to ask him what was wrong, he always gave the same answer, as if rehearsed: "It's just work, Emily." That phrase became a wall between us, something he'd throw out to shut the door on any real conversation. I tried to believe him, I really did, because the idea of something darker scared me more than silence. He acted like I was overreacting, like growing a life inside me wasn't enough to warrant his full attention. But no part of me felt reassured. I didn't scream, I didn't accuse, I just watched him quietly, pretending I believed the lies. But at night, when he turned his back to me in bed, I would stare at the ceiling and feel something break a little deeper. My instincts were screaming, clawing at my chest, begging me to see what was right in front of me. I started doubting everything. His smile, his kisses, his long hours. And even though I couldn't prove it yet, I already knew I was losing him. That night was like any other. Our son finally fell asleep after hours of crying, and my body ached in places I didn't even know could hurt. I told Jason I was going to take a shower to relax. Just 10 minutes of warm water to wash off the weight of the day. I left the bathroom door cracked open slightly so I could hear the baby if he cried. The water was soothing, and for a moment I forgot the tension in the house. But the peace shattered the second I stepped out. As I walked out, towel around my body, my hair dripping, I saw Jason in the hallway. He didn't see me at first. He was holding his phone up, pointed toward the bathroom, right where I had just been standing naked. My heart stopped, confusion hitting first, then a wave of nausea. He quickly turned, pretending like he wasn't doing anything. But the panic in his eyes gave him away. That single image burned into my mind. I knew something was terribly wrong. I clutched the towel tighter around me, my skin suddenly cold despite the hot shower, my heart pounding. I asked him what the hell he was doing, and he laughed it off like I was making a big deal out of nothing. But his face was too calm, too rehearsed, like this wasn't the first time. My body didn't feel safe anymore. Not in my own home, not in front of my own husband. Something about the way he looked at me made me feel exposed, not loved. He shrugged and said he just wanted a photo of me, to remember how I looked during postpartum, since we couldn't be intimate for a while. His tone was casual, as if he were doing something sweet like capturing a memory, but nothing about it felt right. I stared at him, waiting for the rest, for something real, but that's all he gave me. I told him it made me uncomfortable, that he needed to delete whatever he took immediately. He smiled and said, "Of course, no problem." I told him firmly, without raising my voice, to delete those photos immediately, my hands trembling as I clutched the towel. He said yes without hesitation, like it was nothing, like my vulnerability didn't matter. I watched his fingers move on the screen but couldn't see what he was actually doing, and that doubt carved itself into my chest. He kissed my forehead and told me to relax, that everything was fine. But nothing about that moment felt fine. Even after he said the photos were gone, a bitter taste stayed in my mouth, a weight in my stomach that wouldn't leave. I kept seeing his eyes in my mind, calm but calculating, as if he'd hidden something before I could catch it. I tried to convince myself it was just postpartum hormones making me paranoid. But every instinct screamed that he hadn't told me the whole truth. That night I rocked my baby longer than usual, holding him like an anchor. I lay awake in bed, Jason's back turned to me, the room dark except for the faint glow of his phone charging. My mind replayed the scene again and again, the angle of the phone, the look on his face, the casual excuse. Sleep refused to come. Instead, my heart raced, my palms sweated, my body tense as if waiting for an attack. I couldn't focus on the baby's breathing beside me. All I heard was my own pulse in my ears. Something inside me broke that night, but it also woke up. The next morning, after feeding the baby and pretending everything was normal, I made up my mind. When Jason went into the shower, I took his phone from the nightstand with shaking hands, my chest pounding so hard I thought he might hear it over the water. I had never snooped before, never crossed that line, but now it felt like survival. I told myself I'd only look for a second, just to calm my fears. But deep down I already knew what I'd find. My fingers flew across the screen, opening his gallery, his chats, the places he thought I'd never go. Each photo felt like a needle. My heart beat faster with every swipe. It felt wrong, but it also felt necessary, like I was digging up my own autopsy. I was afraid of the truth, but even more afraid of staying blind. And then, in a moment, there it was, the thing I'd been dreading. There, stored neatly in his phone, were the photos of me naked, taken from the doorway while I showered. My breath caught in my throat, my hands went cold, and for a second I thought I'd dropped the phone. He hadn't deleted anything. He had kept it, like a trophy. My skin crawled as I stared at myself through his lens, not as a wife but as an object. My whole world tilted on its axis in that instant. I forced myself to keep scrolling, needing to know everything, and that's when I saw the group chat with his friends. He had sent one of those photos to them, my body exposed, my vulnerability turned into a joke. Under it, his message read, "Look how fat she got after giving birth." My stomach twisted. I felt humiliated, violated, betrayed all at once. Tears blurred the screen, but I kept reading, unable to stop. The pain of seeing that message was like a blade. But the next words were worse than any cut. I could feel my heart splitting in real time, a burning in my chest as if my blood had turned to acid. He had shared the most intimate, fragile version of me with people who laughed behind my back. Yet some part of me knew this wasn't the end of what I'd uncover. I kept scrolling with shaking fingers, bracing myself. Then came the message from one of his friends. "So fat. Good thing you've got top quality meat, that coworker Sarah, to eat." The words hit me like a punch, knocking the air out of my lungs. My head spun, my hands went numb, my whole body trembling as the meaning sank in. This wasn't just disrespect. It was a confession hiding in plain sight. Jason wasn't only humiliating me, he was cheating on me. I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the phone, the baby asleep in his crib, my whole world crumbling in silence. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall, but all I could do was stare at it as if staring could change what I'd read. My heart hurt so badly it felt physical, like a wound inside my chest. I pressed a hand to my mouth to stop the sobs from waking my son. In that moment, I knew my marriage was no longer alive. I wiped my tears, pulled myself together, and took a deep breath as I began capturing everything: screenshots of the messages, the photo, the disgusting comments. I didn't want to act on emotion. I needed proof, something solid, something undeniable. Each click felt like documenting a crime scene because it was. I saved the images, backed them up in a hidden folder on my phone, and made sure everything was preserved. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore, it was about dignity. I placed his phone back exactly where it was, screen down, angle unchanged, as if I had never touched it. My hands were still shaking, but I couldn't let him see it. I had to stay calm, controlled, invisible. When Jason came out of the bathroom, he smiled at me like nothing had happened. I smiled back, hollow and silent, as if we were two strangers pretending to still be a couple. That fake smile would be the last lie I allowed between us. Back in bed, I curled up beside my baby, my body aching from more than just childbirth. I pressed my cheek to his tiny head, letting silent tears stream down my face so no one would hear. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand answers, but I couldn't. Not while holding something so pure, so innocent, so untouched by all this filth. I whispered to him that I'd protect him, even if it meant breaking myself in the process. In the days that followed, I became someone else, calm, careful, watching everything Jason did without showing an ounce of suspicion. I paid attention to his tone, his words, how often he touched his phone, how quickly he pulled away from me. I memorized every move, every late-night work call, every unexplained text. He had no idea I was seeing everything, recording it all in my mind like a detective collecting evidence. I wasn't waiting for him to come clean. I was preparing to survive. It was during dinner one night, over cold leftovers and forced conversation, that he mentioned her name, Sarah. He said it so casually, like she was just another colleague, someone irrelevant. But that name rang in my head like an alarm, the same name from the chat, the same woman he'd been sneaking around with. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I just smiled and asked a few polite questions. But inside I was burning. Suddenly everything began to fit: every late meeting, every conference call, every last-minute business trip over the past month. They weren't work, they were her. I remembered the night he didn't come home until 2 a.m., smelling like a different kind of soap. I remembered how he stopped kissing me without reason, how his phone never left his pocket. The pattern was obvious now, and denial was no longer an option. From that point on, I tracked his habits more closely, always pretending not to care, always wearing a calm, distant mask. I didn't confront, I didn't accuse, I just watched, logging every lie with quiet precision. I read his messages when he left his screen unlocked, noted every time Sarah's name appeared. He thought he was so clever, so careful, but he underestimated the strength of a woman who's been hurt. I didn't need more proof, what I had already found was more than enough, but still I kept digging. Not because I doubted what I knew, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't crazy, that my pain was real, that the betrayal wasn't just imagined. And with every confirmation, every digital footprint, the truth settled heavier in my bones. He had replaced love with secrecy, loyalty with mockery. Jason wasn't mine anymore. He hadn't been for a long time. It took everything in me, but one morning, with the baby napping and the kitchen quiet, I looked at him across the table and said, "We need to talk." My voice didn't shake, even though my insides were screaming. He looked up from his coffee, mildly annoyed, like I was interrupting something more important. I met his eyes and didn't blink. I was done waiting for the right moment. It was now or never. The moment I brought up Sarah's name, his entire face shifted. First confusion, then annoyance, then full-blown defense. "What are you even talking about?" he snapped, leaning back in his chair like I had insulted him. He acted like I was crazy, like I had invented it all in some postpartum hormonal breakdown. I sat there, staring at the man I used to trust, and realized he would lie until the end. But this time I wasn't backing down. I laid the screenshots on the table like weapons, one by one, watching his expression fall apart as the truth cornered him. He tried to deflect, to twist it, to claim it was just jokes at first, but then finally he exhaled and said it. Yes, I've been with her. His voice was flat, like it wasn't even a big deal. I stared at him, stunned, not just by the betrayal but by how little he seemed to care. The man in front of me wasn't sorry, he was just caught. He didn't apologize. Instead he said, I needed it. You don't attract me like you used to, and besides we couldn't do anything during postpartum. I froze, every word slicing deeper than the last, as if my recovery, my pain, my body meant nothing to him. He looked at me like I was supposed to understand, to accept that cheating was somehow my fault. I felt something inside me harden. A place that would never let him touch me again. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there, silent, as the pieces of me scattered inside like glass breaking in slow motion. I thought the worst pain was discovering the truth, but no, this was worse. Hearing it from his mouth, watching him justify it without remorse, made me feel like nothing, like disposable skin he once wore and now wanted to shed. I looked him in the eyes and said, I want a divorce. And I said it clearly, firmly, without shaking. He didn't argue, didn't try to stop me, just gave a lazy shrug and muttered, Fine. That was the moment I knew there was nothing left to save. The man who once cried over our first positive pregnancy test couldn't even pretend to care. I turned my back and walked away, and this time I didn't look back. After he packed a few bags and moved out, I waited for a call, a message, some kind of gesture to see his son. But none came. Weeks passed, then months, and Jason vanished completely from both our lives, as if fatherhood had been a phase he'd outgrown. No diapers, no visits, no questions. Just silence, like our child didn't exist. That was the part that crushed me the most. Not losing him as a husband, but watching him erase our son like he was a mistake. I would feed the baby at night and wonder if Jason even remembered his name. There were no birthday calls, no support, no check-ins when he had a fever or cried for hours. He didn't just leave me. He left his responsibility, his blood, his promise. And I had to carry all of it alone. With bills piling up and my heart worn thin, I made the hardest call of my life. I packed our things and left the apartment we once called our forever home. I moved back to Ohio, to my mother's house, swallowing pride with every box I loaded into the car. The nursery I had decorated so lovingly was now empty, cold, just another room in a place filled with ghosts. I cried the whole drive, but I never turned around. I couldn't. My mother welcomed me like only a mother can. No judgment, just warm arms and quiet strength. She helped me settle in, held the baby when I needed to cry, and reminded me that survival is still a kind of victory. Her home became my sanctuary, a place to breathe, to fall apart safely. And slowly I started to rebuild, not for Jason, not for revenge, but for me and my son. We were all each other had now. That first year broke me in ways I didn't think were possible. Sleepless nights bled into exhausting days, and every smile from my baby was earned through pain, fear, and relentless fatigue. I fought through feeding schedules, bills I could barely pay, and moments when I wanted to disappear just to escape the weight. But I didn't disappear, I endured. Even when I didn't feel strong, I showed up every single day. When my son turned 1, I knew I couldn't survive on my mother's help forever. I needed to stand on my own feet again. I dusted off my resume, applied to dozens of jobs, and finally landed one in a small office that paid just enough. Going back to work felt like diving into ice, leaving my baby behind for the first time. But it was a step forward, and that's all I needed. One step at a time. While I worked, my mother became more than just support. She became my son's second heartbeat, the calm in the chaos. She fed him, rocked him to sleep, taught him to clap and smile while I sat in traffic and pushed through long hours. Every night I came home to a child who never felt abandoned, because she made sure he always felt loved. I owe her more than I can ever repay. She didn't just help me survive. She made sure my son never felt the absence of his father. One morning, after months of feeling like I'd disappeared inside motherhood and heartbreak, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. I was tired, pale, heavier than I used to be, not just in body but in soul. That day, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would come back to life. Not for a man, not for revenge, but for the girl I used to be. The one who still deserved to feel whole again. I joined a local gym, even though just walking in the door made me feel exposed and out of place. My legs were weak, my breath short, but I kept showing up day after day, week after week. Slowly, the pounds began to fall, but something deeper shifted too. I began reclaiming my body, not to look good for anyone else, but to feel strong again. Each drop of sweat was a quiet victory. Months later, I caught my reflection in a store window and did a double take. Not because I looked thin, but because I looked alive. My eyes had light again, my posture had changed, and for the first time in years, I smiled without forcing it. I wasn't hiding behind oversized clothes or apologies anymore. I looked like a woman who'd been through hell and walked out stronger. And that woman was me. That's when Jason showed up again. Unannounced, smug, leaning on the doorframe like he still had a place in my life. He looked me up and down with that same arrogance, like I was something he suddenly remembered he once wanted. "You look good," he said, as if that erased everything. I didn't flinch. I stood taller, quieter, and waited to hear what lie he'd tell next. He claimed he missed me, that he'd made mistakes, that Sarah wasn't what he thought. I listened, arms crossed, while he painted himself as a victim of confusion and pressure. He didn't mention our son, didn't ask how he was, didn't apologize for the photo, the chat, the abandonment. He thought I'd forgotten. He thought I was the same woman he left behind. He was wrong. I looked him in the eye and said, "You have no power over me anymore. It's over." No screaming, no tears, just truth. He blinked, confused, like he couldn't understand how I had stopped needing him. But it wasn't sudden. It was built from every sleepless night, every tear he never saw, every day I survived without him. I had let him go long before he realized he'd lost me. That moment didn't just close a door. It rebuilt something inside me. For the first time since everything shattered, I felt steady, grounded, untouchable. I wasn't the woman begging for answers or pretending to be okay. I was the woman who had faced betrayal and still stood tall. And that version of me? She wasn't going anywhere. After that day, Jason never reached out again. No calls, no messages, no more fake apologies. He disappeared the same way he had walked out, quietly, selfishly, and without a trace of remorse. I stopped waiting. He was no longer the ghost I fought in my dreams. He was just a man I once knew, and I never looked for him again. The years passed and I raised my son alone, filling his world with stability, warmth, and truth. I taught him to be kind, to respect women, to speak his feelings and never hide from hard conversations. I gave him what I never had. A safe home with a mother who showed up no matter how hard the day was. Every hug from him healed a little more of me. We were small, but we were whole. By the time my son turned 5, I had built a new rhythm, one that didn't include pain as the background noise. I was no longer surviving. I was living, even laughing and rediscovering small joys that once felt impossible. I could cook dinner without crying, sleep through the night without fear, and go days without thinking of Jason. The scars were still there, but they didn't control me anymore. I had become someone stronger, and so had my boy. It happened on a random Tuesday, at a library reading event for kids, where I bumped into a man helping a little girl pick out a book. He smiled at me with that quiet kindness that doesn't try too hard. It just exists. We exchanged a few words, something simple about kids and chaos, and then something clicked. He didn't know my past, didn't see my pain, he just saw me. And for the first time in years, I let myself see him too. Over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other. At the park, the bookstore, the grocery store. It didn't feel like fate or magic. It felt real slow, like a friendship unfolding in quiet moments. He asked questions but never pushed. He listened. He remembered little details and never once made me feel like I had to be anyone but myself. I found myself looking forward to his voice, his warmth, his presence. Something was blooming. When he finally asked me out, my hands trembled, not from fear of him, but from fear of myself. Could I trust again? Could I open a door I had nailed shut? But his kindness had earned a space in my life, and I said yes. That first dinner was simple, nothing grand, but his eyes held no judgment, no hidden agenda. When he smiled at me, I felt something unfamiliar. Hope? The most beautiful surprise was how naturally my son connected with him. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just quiet acceptance. He never tried to take over, never forced affection. He played cars, listened to endless dinosaur facts, and always made sure my son felt seen. The first time my boy called him my friend, I had to excuse myself to cry in the hallway. I knew this was different. Even as things grew deeper, part of me waited for the hurt to return, for the shoe to drop, the lie to surface, the floor to vanish beneath my feet. But he gave me no reason to run, no excuse to doubt. Every time I flinched at affection, he waited. Every time I hesitated, he offered safety, not pressure. Slowly, I realized I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid I might actually be happy again. Together, we built something that wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about starting new, from the ground up. There were no rushed declarations, no games, just mutual respect and gentle care. He loved me not in spite of my past, but with full awareness of it. He didn't rescue me. He stood beside me as I rescued myself. And in that space, love grew real, grounded, honest. I was no longer the woman in the shower, the one caught through a lens of cruelty and shame. I was no longer the mother silently weeping beside a crib at night. I had taken every shattered piece and welded them together with grit, with patience, with love. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who didn't need approval to feel whole. I had become someone I never thought I'd meet myself. I used to think love was sacrifice, endurance, survival, but now I know true love doesn't destroy, it protects. It doesn't mock, it honors. It's not about earning worth. It's about sharing life in a way that never asks you to shrink. What Jason gave me was never love. It was control dressed in charm. What I have now is peace. And peace is louder than pain. When I look at my son now, confident, gentle, full of light, I know I gave him more than just a safe home. I gave him a model of resilience, of dignity, of a woman who refused to break. He watches me with new eyes, not just as his mom, but as someone who taught him what respect looks like. He doesn't know the full story yet, but one day he will. And he'll know his mother chose strength. I used to think my life had ended the day I saw that photo on his phone. The day I realized the man I loved had humiliated and discarded me. But now, years later, I see that was only the beginning, because from that wreckage I built a new version of myself. Not perfect, not without pain, but whole. I no longer carry the weight of what he did. I carry the strength of what I survived. And in that strength I was reborn. There was no dramatic ending. No final text or apology from Jason. Just silence, which became a gift. I didn't need him to admit what he had done to feel free. I had faced every truth alone, and that gave me a power no apology ever could. Closure didn't come from him. It came from choosing peace over resentment. And peace finally stayed. Every year on my son's birthday, I sit with him after the cake and whisper the story. Not all of it, but enough. I tell him he was born from love, even if love didn't last. That he was wanted, that he is everything good I ever created. He doesn't ask about his father much, but when he does, I tell the truth gently. Our story doesn't begin with betrayal, it begins with him. The man in our lives now never tried to replace anyone. He simply showed up every day with presence and consistency. He taught my son to ride a bike, helped him with math, waited outside school plays with flowers. I watched their bond grow not through blood, but through effort and love. One night, my son called him Dad, and none of us corrected it. We just smiled and kept moving forward. I went back to school part-time, chasing a dream I buried under years of pain and diapers. I studied at night after bedtime stories, typing essays beside empty bottles and baby monitors. It was hard, but that diploma didn't just change my resume. It changed how I saw myself. I wasn't just rebuilding, I was rising. I never said it out loud, but one day, quietly, I forgave Jason, not because he deserved it, but because I did. Holding on to rage kept me tied to him, and I didn't want that anymore. Forgiveness wasn't approval, it was release. I let it go, all of it. And in doing so, I made space for more love. There are still days when I flinch at certain words, or when I doubt a compliment without meaning to. Healing is not perfect, not linear. It's layered and slow. But even those moments remind me of how far I've come. Scars don't mean I'm weak, they mean I lived. And lived with courage. Now that he's older, my son asks deeper questions, ones that pierce. Why did he leave us? He asked once, eyes too serious for his age. I told him the truth in pieces, never hiding, never blaming myself. He looked at me and said, "Then I'll never be like him." I hugged him tight and whispered, "You already aren't." I am not the same Emily who stood in that bathroom with a towel and shattered trust. I am not the woman who begged for answers, who cried silently beside a crib. I am someone who walked through fire and built a home from ashes, who raised a child, rebuilt a future, and learned to love again on her terms. I am whole. I am enough. And I am free.